When Jesus was 30, remember his prefrontal cortex was fully developed, he went to church on the Sabbath, as was his custom, and he was asked to read a passage. And you'll find the story in Luke chapter 4, verse 18. And this is what he read. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those that are bruised, to preach the acceptable day of the Lord." Now we know from looking at Jesus' ministry that he absolutely did that. And for those, and I think most were here this morning, I would like to take your mind back to where I discussed what often happens when someone forgives, that they are set free. And I believe that this quote from Luke chapter 4 is in direct relationship to the medical missionary work. We see many captives set free, captive to caffeine, captive to alcohol, captive to many different types of drugs, whether they be legal or illegal. We see the captives set free. We see them set free when they discover the power of forgiveness. We see the captives set free when they realise the power of forgiveness in their own lives, in forgiving themselves. And it rings true very much to a passage that you'll find in Isaiah chapter 42, starting at verse 5, where the Bible says, "Thus saith God the Lord, he that created the heavens, that stretched them out, he that brought forth the earth and that which comes out of it, he that giveth breath to the people upon it, and spirit to them that dwell therein. I, the Lord, hath called thee in righteousness. I will hold thine hand, I will keep thee, I will give thee for a covenant of the people and a light of the Gentiles, to open the blind eyes." Here we are again. To open the blind eyes, to bring the prisoners out of the prison, and they that sit in darkness out of the prison house. For I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another. Some of the poorest people that come to our health retreat are the wealthiest in worldly goods. And if you were to knock on their door, if you could even get to their door, the door would most likely be shut in your face. But they pay quite a large sum of money and they come into our health retreat. And I think it's a wonderful thing that God gave to us was this health message. And I think many of us are familiar where Ellen White says it's the right arm of the gospel. It is the opening wedge. And we find that it opens many hearts. And it might sound terrible for me to say this, but I am grateful for people suffering from headaches when they stop caffeine, because it allows us to come in and give them hot foot baths and massage their shoulders and put some cool on their head. All our girls worked for us at one stage. My two eldest daughters were massage therapists and still are. My third daughter was in the kitchen as the cook. But my middle daughter Jessica was giving a hot foot bath to a lady one day who was suffering from caffeine withdrawals. And my daughter Jessica was massaging her shoulders, tending the hot water every now and then to keep the water hot, putting cool on her head. And she looked at the lady and the lady was crying. And Jessica said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "No one has ever touched me the way you are touching me." This lady was in her 50s. She said, "No one has ever tended me the way that you are tending me." She said, "I was put in a boarding school at the age of 13. She said, "I married at 21, but my husband is a hard man." No one had ever touched her like that. I think the medical missionary work is a way that God planned for people's hearts to be touched. And we see it also again in Isaiah 58. And Isaiah 58, Ellen White says it's God's love letter to humanity. And it starts like this. It says, "Cry aloud, spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet. Show my people their transgression, the house of Jacob their sins." Do you know how we do that? We do it by showing them on the board what alcohol does, by showing them what caffeine does, by showing them what refined sugar does. That's how you can cry aloud and spare not. Say it like it is. Whereas if I go to someone and say, "You shouldn't be drinking that, you shouldn't be eating that, and if you do, well, look, they're gone." Is that right? But from the front, from the board, you can explain what these things do. Then it's objective. You are not criticising them, because remember, God's number one character trait is mercy. Merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression and sin. That's why God wants to write his name in our foreheads. And every medical missionary should go into the medical missionary work with God's name written in their foreheads. Because remember, many are sick through ignorance. They do not realise. And remember that great deceiver who walks around seeing who can devour. So it's important when we read the Bible, and the Bible will show us, it sweeps the curtain aside and it shows us where the real battle lies. And it shows us how many are sick through ignorance. Many have been deceived into thinking a little coffee won't hurt. Deceived into thinking a little drugs won't hurt. Deceived into thinking I can go to bed at midnight, that really won't hurt me that much. It's a great deception. So let's go back to Isaiah 58. It says in verse 2, "Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinance of justice and take delight in approaching to God." So we're talking about Christians here. God says they delight to seek me daily and they delight to know my ways. But they have a complaint. "Wherefore have we fasted," they say, "and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our souls, and thou takest no knowledge?" And then God says, "Behold, in the day of thy fast they find pleasure, and exact all thou labours. Behold, you fast for strife and debate, and smite with the fist of wickedness." And when we see what the Pharisees were like in Jesus' day, it seems a direct application. People weren't allowed to go more than 2 steps on the Sabbath. They weren't allowed to lift up a chair on the Sabbath. They'd taken to extreme rules. Then God says, "Is this the fast that I have chosen, to bow down thine head as a bulrush, to spread sackcloth and ashes under thee? Wilt thou call this a fast, an acceptable day of the Lord?" And then look what God says, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke?" And we said that directly in the health retreat. In the health retreat, many people come to the retreat to get a better way of life. Some come to get help to coming off their medication. Some come to detoxify from alcohol, from drugs. They're the heavy burdens being undone. But not only do they detox from that, we show them a better way of life. In Australia, it's a very ungodly nation. You almost can't talk about God. But in my lectures, I weave through Proverbs here and there. At the meal, we pray. We had one lady about to leave because we prayed at the meal. That's Australia. But you know, it's a long way to go, and they've paid a lot of money. And my husband has written down, if they leave, they don't get anything back. So they stay. So they stay. And that's why when the caffeine headaches come on, praise God, now we can tend them, now we can help them, now we can bring relief to their suffering. So God says, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to undo the bands of wickedness, the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, to bring the poor that is cast out? And when thou seest the naked, that thou coverest him, and turn not thy face from thine own flesh. Now look what it says then. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning. Thine health shall spring forth speedily. Did you hear that? This is a health message. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning. Thine health shall spring forth how? Speedily. Thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. What's the glory of the Lord? Remember what Moses said, I beseech you, show me your glory. He proclaimed the name of the Lord. Merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression and sin, who will no wise pardon the guilty. There is definitely a health message in here. Ellen White says in one of her books, she says, one of the best remedies for disease is doing good for others. And so, what does it mean to open the blind eyes? You see in some of these, in what Jesus said, to open the blind eyes, and also in Isaiah 42, to open the blind eyes. I'd like to take you to a verse that's found in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 3, where it says, but if our gospel be hid, it be hid to them that are lost, to whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of men. Now this is another type of blindness. This isn't the eye blindness, this is the mind blindness. And look at why. Lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ should shine upon them. Jesus said, whoever follows me shall have the light of life and not walk in darkness. And what we find that as the days go by in the detox program, the people begin to ask questions. In fact, I was in the steam bath one day, and our steam sauna, it's like a little hut, and it's a wooden hut, and underneath the seats there's a copper pipe. It's a wood-fired steam bath, so outside the fire's lit, the water heats up and the steam comes through. And it can sit 8 people who are about my size. Ladies a little bit bigger, we might take 6 people in. And there's lots of talking in the steam bath. And so I say to our staff, remember what it says in James chapter 1. James chapter 1, and I think it's about verse 19. Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Listen, let the people ask questions. And sometimes they'll say, why are you a Seventh-day Adventist? Don't you love that question? And if I start to speak, I'll keep it short, and I see 2 people looking very uncomfortable, I keep it very short, and I don't say much more. And then I say to the lady that asked me later, I said, I'll tell you the full story a little later. So we must ever be mindful of the minds and the hearts of people, because God and God alone, He knows the key to that heart. And sometimes it's caffeine headaches and us tending them that can be the key to that heart. So how do you start? This is how I started. I was in a rainforest. We're a long way from the doctor, from town. And sometimes the children had a fever, sometimes they had a cough, sometimes they'd have some discomfort. But I had some books, and whenever there was a problem, I'd look up and see what the book says. So before we moved to the rainforest, when my children were very little, my first 2, my first one was probably 4, and my second one was 2. And all the children surrounding us that my children had anything to do with, they all got whooping cough. And whooping cough is a cough where you cough, 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 then they gasp for breath. There's the hoop. And so what I did with my children, I brought them home and I looked up herbs for coughs. And I mentioned one that I used this morning, and it's plantain. And the reason why I use plantain is because there was a lot of plantain growing in the backyard where I lived. And it was the broadleaf plantain. And I looked up it and it was good for the chest. So I made lots of it. I put it in a big pot. I poured lots of boiling water in and let it sit. And when it was a little cooler, I'd strain the leaves out. I'd put a little lemon and honey in it. And I had little tea parties for my children. I got them special funny straws that wiggle, and I just got a lot of this into them. Now it's called the 100-day cough in China. So this cough goes for a long time. I totally conquered it in 30 days, almost unheard of. Just with this tea, I just gave them lots. Now one of my children was still wetting the bed at the time, and I thought, I don't mind if they wet the bed as long as I conquer this cough. No wet bed. So I went back to the book and I found that it also helps with the kidneys. These were some of my first introductions to the simple herbs. And I remember it was to the point where all my friends, their children were still coughing. So we decided to keep the children away from them. And my friends said, "What did you do?" And when I told them what I did, they were very sad because their children used to drink juice. They're not going to drink this tea. That's why it's important to just give your children water. We used to have children visit when I was in the rainforest who only drank juice. So we'd get a cup of water for them and say, "Here, have a glass of tap juice." Or we'd call it cloud juice. It was just pure water. My children were allowed to have some juice if they would go on a fast for a day. Often my children would choose to have a fast if they had a cold. See, if they stopped eating, they didn't have to do school. Now that's easy for breakfast. The real test comes at lunchtime. And then if they chose to have a fast, I would let them have some juice, maybe some watermelon. But this is also how the children learn. And so little by little we were learning natural remedies. I had a friend visit who is a PhD in herbal medicine, and she went through the garden with me and she showed me what the dandelion was and what it was good for. She showed me different herbs, and that's also how I learned herbs. And I also told you some experiences this morning of different things that I did with the children, and that's the best practical training, is just doing it yourself. So every morning I would pray and I would say, "Father in heaven, what would you have me do?" And every day he would impress me with your children, your children. Well, I was homeschooling my children, and the children were part of the family team. We had rosters and they certainly knew how to work. They all had their own. I used to give each child a couple of vegetables and they were responsible for those vegetables. They also had their own flower garden. If they had excess vegetables, they could sell them. So, you know, we'd done all that. And then one day I was praying. My youngest was 5. No, he was 4. And I was praying, "Father, what would you have me do?" And I got a strong impression, start giving meetings, demonstrating natural remedies. That was the impression I got. And I thought, well, I could do that. I've been working on the children for a long time. And a lot of the people in the town were way up in the rainforest. It was just a tiny little town about half an hour away. I had some of my, some girlfriends I knew around. They had started to ring me if their children had a problem. In fact, I found out later, they gave me the nickname Earth Mother. They'd say, "Ring Earth Mother." She's up in the rainforest. She's got 6 children and she doesn't go to the doctor. She treats her children with herbs, with natural things. So I had a little bit of experience by this time. So God gave me an impression, start giving meetings. Now every morning I would go into the children after my prayer, and then I would have worship with them. We're reading through the Bible, and we're reading through some of Ellen White's writings, and I think it was Second Testimony. We were just up to a certain point, so we always had a couple of songs, then we prayed and read a bit from the Bible, and then I opened to where we were at, and I started the paragraph, and it said, "Let meetings be given to teach the people how to do natural remedies." I said to the children, God just told me this in prayer. And look what it says there. God speaks to us through our mind. He speaks to us through his word. It was Sabbath morning, and we went to church, and church was a whole hour away. And when I got to church, I said to the people in the church, it was a 40-member church in a little country town, I said, I've had this strong impression from God to give meetings. And we had a retired pastor there. He said, great, let's do them on Sabbath afternoon. We can get brochures made up. And I said, hang on a minute. I have to put some meetings together. I said, give me a couple of months. So I went home and I got my nurses anatomy and physiology book out. I had the book Ministry of Healing. And so what I did was I put together 6 meetings. The first two meetings were hydrotherapy, and I'd been doing these things on the children a long time. And what I thought I'd do is I'd have the children one by one up the front, and I would demonstrate the water treatments on them. So the first 2 were water treatments. The second one was poultices. We looked at poultices, I think, Tuesday morning. And if you Google Barbara O'Neill poultices, there's a whole presentation, and I guess it's a lot more involved than my first poultice meeting. And then the third meeting was on herbs, and what I did was I potted dandelion, and then I potted false dandelion in a pot. I potted some plantain, so I potted all these herbs from the garden so that I could show the people what they look like and what they did. And then the 5th meeting I did on the 8 laws of health. And then the last meeting, the 6th meeting, I just spoke on nutrition. And I talked to the church, and we arranged to have a meal. So the people could come a little bit earlier. The meetings were usually at 3. So if they came at 1 o'clock, we'd serve a meal, and then we'd go into the final meeting. So that's what we did. The church was very excited about it because they were wondering how to do outreach. They'd just done a series of cooking classes and no one had turned up. It was just a little tiny country town, a lot of dairy farmers there. And so we made up these little brochures and we put them around the town, and it was very, very exciting to start our first meeting. Now, a week before the meeting started, I got a cold and I lost my voice. It almost seems like I've lost it at the moment, but it's hanging in there. And I was coughing through church, I was coughing through Sabbath school, and everyone was turning around and looking at me because I'm starting my health meetings in the afternoon. But I just prayed, and I said to the people, please pray for me, please pray for me. And the people started coming. 10, 20, 30, 40 people from the town came. That was huge in this little country town. And when I started to speak, my voice was a little rusty, and I began to be terrified because I'm not used to speaking in public. And then it went as clear as a bell. And for 1 hour, it was as clear as a bell. I just praised God, because when I'd finished, I started coughing again, and I could hardly speak. And I did a hot foot bath on my little 4-year-old William, and he just sat there smiling at everyone the whole time. And then I did hot and cold fermentations on another one of my children, and again, they were used to it. Now the next week was the second meeting, and we had trouble with that one too. It's as if the devil seemed to do everything to stop our meetings. Now, my first husband was not a Christian, and he used to go to the club on Friday night. And we got up Sabbath morning and he hadn't come home yet. And my children said, "Mum, he's not home. What are we going to do?" And I said, "We're just going to pray that everything will be all right." So we had worship and we thanked God. We had our breakfast. We had to leave at 8 to get in there at 9. At 7:45, he drove in. Oh, we were so relieved. And then we quickly packed our bags and we got into church. That was such a great blessing. And then the second one, we demonstrated a wet sheet pack. Tristan was talking about the wet sheet pack that he did with COVID. And my son Peter is the boy that had asthma. He was used to me doing so many things to him, I could do anything to Peter. And he'd even go on a wet sheet. Anyway, he let me wrap him up. He'd be going like this, but then he'd relax when the blanket went on, and everyone's looking at this boy being wrapped in a wet sheet. And I put my hand down the sheet and I said, "Usually within 10 minutes you can feel the sheets warming up." And he started to giggle because I must have tickled him. And here's this little boy wrapped up tight like a mummy, giggling away. And I found it very much softened the people's hearts. And then my little boy, William, I had a heating compress on him because he'd had a cold. Now what you do with a heating compress, you have a big cotton bandage that you've made out of a cotton sheet, and you wet it and you wrap it around their chest and around their neck, and then you cover that with wool and then a bit of cling wrap around that, and then put their tops on. And I always put like a well-fitting skivvy, we'd call it, a turtleneck, not sure what they call it here, and then a woolen jumper. Anyway, I remember saying, "Now it's time to change William's heating compress. Come on, William." William came running up, and there was a table there, and I sat him on the table, and I unpinned, because you'd pin it in a few places, and I said, "See, it's totally dry. I put it on this morning, but it can really help when a child has a congested chest." And I'm taking it off, and I heard people laughing, and I thought, what are they laughing at? And I looked at Will, and William's going like this to all the people, and they laughed. And that also seemed to break the ice. And then I got the wet cloth, wrung it out, and it is, again, very uncomfortable. And I just wrapped it on him, and he just smiled the whole time. And then I put the wool on, and then I put the glad wrap and put his top on and put the woolen jumper on, or you call it a woolen sweater. And he had a little bib and brace overalls, and I buttoned that up and it holds it tight. And then off he went to play. So it was an illustration of what you can do for your children. And we found that the people were very, very much warming to the meetings. Now, let me see, every week something happened. So the next week it had been raining a lot. And when it rains, I have to show you what it was like getting out of our property. There's the creek, and our house is way back here, so it's a drive all around like that. You come to the creek, then there's a steep hill. Maybe it's not that steep. Then there's a steep hill, more like that, and then there's the main road. But the main road was such a dirt road, and that was, I'm not sure what it is in mile, but it was 0.8 of a kilometre, maybe a mathematician, but it can tell us, but it was quite a long road. So we'd stop here and we'd pray, especially when it had been raining, because it'd get slippery, and I had a transit van. So we'd pray, and then the children would sing the hymn, Sound the Battle Cry. Do you know Sound the Battle Cry? We'd sing it at the top of our voice, but I had to flatten it. I've heard Shiloh say, put the pedal to the metal. I had to put my foot down and get speed up, and I had to go very fast through the creek to get a run up to the other side. Most of the time I'd get up, but this day we got up to here. And it would not go any further. The wheels were really slipping. Now when I went through the creek, I lost my brakes. So what I had to do was I had to put it in gear and turn the engine off, and the gear would hold it. Because remember, I've got no brakes. And I said to James, quick James, run out and put rocks behind the wheels. So there we're stuck on the hill. And I have done it before, but it's very difficult to do, to go backwards down this slippery hill. You just put your foot on the clutch and it starts to go, then you take your foot off the clutch, then put your foot on the clutch and it goes a bit more, then take your foot off the clutch. Oh, it's really hair-raising. And we were up too far for me to do that, because I have done it before, and then you try another run up. I said to James, run back and get Dad. We'll see if he can get it up the hill. So James ran along, jumped through the rocks, through the creek, ran all the way, and got his father, who was not happy, because, he'd got home very late from the pub. So he got in one of the other little cars, and he was driving so fast, I knew he wasn't very happy. He jumped out, got in the car, and made it go back down the hill, got up here, and he put his foot down hard and, whoa, got it up. Oh, the children and I just praised God. Now, we're all in our nice clothes. We're on the side of the road. So we quickly ran up the top of the hill, jumped in the car and said, thank you. And then, so then we've got this long road all the way to town. It's a long way. It's an hour into town. But it used to be a bullock road, so there's no steeps and there's no downs. It's fairly steady. And it had been raining a lot, so it was a little bit slippery. And I had learnt that you don't put your foot down hard and you don't brake hard. You just keep it in about a second, maybe third gear, and you just go along at a steady rate, and you won't get bogged in all of the dirt. Now, just as we're about to go, a Jeep goes past. Now, you never see another car on that road because it's way out in the bush. And we thought, that's unusual. So anyway, we're going along and we're about 3/4 of the way along the road. We turn a corner and there's a huge log across the road. And the man in the Jeep, he's got a rope on it because he's got a Jeep, and he pulls the log off the road. So we are just praising God for that. And then I saw him talk to the lady in the car. She was in a Subaru. Do you know Subarus? They're sort of four-wheel drives. His was four-wheel drive. And he's looking at that lady, pointing to me, going like this. And then they both walked up to me. And he said, this lady wants to know if she can get through. And I said, she possibly can because she's got four-wheel drive, because we don't know how you're getting through. Because I didn't have a four-wheel drive. Praise be to God, what he does. Anyway, it doesn't end there. So we get back into town, there's the church. So we finally get into town, and it's about tar from here, maybe that's a 15-minute drive. And we're going along, and just as we're coming to the corner, a car comes along, and I put my foot on the brakes quickly, and there's no brakes. So the car goes straight across the road and just misses that other car. Oh. There'd been so much happening, and it was so quick I didn't have time to go down on the gears like I usually do, because we lose the brakes when we go through the creek, and the brakes aren't great anyway. So God helped us in so many ways. This was just one of the days of those meetings. So we finally get into church and we smile and we said, it's been a bit of a hairy drive this morning. So we sat down. And the children went to Sabbath school, and apparently James was telling everybody about everything that happened to us that morning. And when church started, the lady got up the front and she said, I think Barbara's got a few stories to tell us about her trip to church today. James had told them all about our hair-raising trip to church. That was the second week. Three days before the third weekend, the engine blows up on the car. And we have no car. So my neighbour said, and she was a relative, you can borrow my car. So we borrowed the car and we went to town and they said, where's your car? And I said, oh, the engine just blew up. And a lady from church came up to me and said, would you like an interest-free loan to fix your car? Isn't God good? Because my husband was a drug addict and an alcoholic. We had no money. So we got an interest-free loan to pay off the car. Every week for 6 weeks something happened. And we're reading in, it's Psalm 34, and it's verse 19. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. But we were so excited that those 40 people that came every week, a little more came every week. And they were excited about the simple messages that we were giving them. And we had some of the people inquire about doing some more meetings, and the retired pastor started to introduce a Revelation and Daniel seminar, and that's where we saw the right arm in action. I had no qualifications at all. In fact, I really didn't know much at all. All I knew is the simple things that I'd done to help the children. Now, things just also went on from there. A lady heard about the meetings I did and asked me to go down to Victoria and give the meetings, and then they filmed the meetings. This was in 1992, 1993. And so a little bit more, they started to go out there. And I found that the best way to learn is to teach. It is the very best way. And without me even knowing it, the children were learning so much. And I found that if I was caught up with people, people are asking my children, and my children are telling them about it. And I remember one day I was hanging the clothes on the line. So here's the big house that was just stapled together with tar paper. And here's a little hill, and I've got a clothesline up the hill with all the clothes on it. And I'm up here getting the clothes off the line, that's me. And I saw the children running, all of the children running. One of them had the littlest one on their hip, and I thought, whoa, what are they doing? And then they sat one of the children down on the front veranda, and one of them ran inside and came out with a bowl and put it on the child. I thought I'd just step back and see what they were doing, because they weren't looking for me. And when it all settled down and the children are standing back feeling very happy about what they'd just done, I went down and I said, what happened? And they said, oh, bee sting. So one of the children who got a bee sting, they weren't looking for me. They knew exactly what to do. And what was interesting, and when they became teenagers and someone was sick at work, they'd ring Mum. Mum, my mate's sick. What should he do? They told me they had to stop saying Mum said, because they didn't seem to be impressed with Mum said. Things got very difficult in our mountain home, and the children and I had to leave. In 1993, the children and I had to leave home, and all we had was the clothes on our back. And the people at church, it was lovely. They brought us food, they brought us clothes, and I was able to get on the single pension, and I was able to get a house in a little town nearby. And then we started going to church, and you can imagine when we went into a church, 6 children, we instantly got a Sabbath school. And then as time went on, they asked me to do Sabbath school presentations, and I always seemed to get a little bit of health in there. And then they discovered that I could do health meetings. So I started to do health meetings in the town. And the more I taught, the more I learnt. And sometimes people would ask questions and I'm not sure what the answer was, so I would go home and I'd search it out. And then in 1996, 6, the children and I moved up to Living Valley Springs in Queensland because my eldest daughter was a massage therapist there, and my next daughter was training to be a massage therapist. And I'd been there a few months, and the children and I, we had a little house down the road. We moved up there because my eldest girls were there. And the children and I would come every morning and we'd work their garden. We'd dig their veggie garden, we'd weed it, and we'd help there. And then one day I was going past the health centre and they looked a little stressed. I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, our sanitary supervisor has just walked off. I said, "Would you like me to help?" And they said, "Please." And that's how I started to work 3 hours a day as the supervisor in the health centre. By then my children were basically almost self-sufficient with their schoolwork, and I started to work there part-time. After a year, the business manager asked me to marry him. And I said yes. I told the story this morning. And after we'd been married for about 3 months, Michael was in the office and he had a couple come from Brisbane, an hour away, and they had an appointment with Gary Martin, who was the health director, and they said, "We have an appointment with Gary Martin." And Michael said, "Gary Martin already has an appointment for that time." And they started to get very upset. They said, "We have come a long way and we booked this appointment." Now my daughter Julia, who was 14 at the time, was working in the office, and she whispered to Michael, "Did you know Mum's a naturopath?" And Michael said, "Is she?" So Michael said to the couple, "I think I've got someone who can help you." So he rang me up and he said, "Barbara, we've got this couple, they're double booked. Can you come down and talk to them?" Now I immediately thought, no, I can't. But you know, all God's biddings are his enablings. And my heart felt compassion for this couple who'd come so far. I said, okay, because I didn't really consider myself a naturopath. I just considered that I helped mothers and other people, gave them a little bit of advice. And so I came down, I put a nice outfit on, I sat in the office, and I didn't really know what to do, but you know what I did? I knew the 8 laws. And this lady had a tumour. She'd tried the medical way, and you know, the side effects were terrible. So I just went through all the laws with her. I went through every law. I looked at if does she need to, what's her sleep like? So I assessed every one. I talked about exercise, specifically the exercise she could do considering she had a tumour. I talked about the sort of food that would help. I didn't know near what I know now. I talked to her about drinking more water. I talked to her about having faith in God and his natural remedies. And then I talked to her about castor oil compresses. I said, you can apply these castor oil compresses overnight, every night. And I said, don't forget, find a place where you can put your breast in the sun. So I probably was with her for about an hour. Her and her husband took the history and made advice. And they said, thank you so much. And I smiled and went home and took my nice outfit off and put my Queen of the Household Duties outfit on and continued with everything that you do when you're well, we had 8 children at that point, but 3 of them were working, so we had 5 at home, homeschool. Michael came home that night and he said, what did you say to those people? And when he said that, I thought, oh dear, I've blown it, I've done something wrong. I really don't know much. That's what I thought. He said, what did you say? He said, they are so happy. They paid the full amount for the consultation. They've booked into the health retreat in 2 weeks and they want you there. Wow, that amazed me. That totally amazed me. I was not expecting that at all because I really didn't think I did anything. So if you don't think you know very much, you probably know more than you think. I think I must have known more than I think. But if I compare what I knew then to what I know now, I know hundreds of times more now than I knew then. And yet what I did, I worked with what I had. After a year, Michael wanted to start his own health retreat. We were offered, because people saw what Michael did. He is very good at starting health retreats. People say, Barbara, can you tell us how to start a health retreat? I said, I don't know much. My husband, he knows the health side of it. So we went down there, and I think I mentioned this morning. Our 3 boys were the gardeners. My daughter Jessica, she was trained in massage. She was our massage therapist. Julia was 15. She was our cook. And Michael's daughter Michaela, I think she was 12. She was a very good typist. So she was the secretary. And that's where I said to him, who will be the health director? He said, you. And I said, no, I'm just a mother. And I help other mothers. He said, no, you'll be good. And he walked out of the room. Because I'm naturally very shy. And anyway, there it was. So I thought, well, okay, I know that all God's biddings are his enablings. What God asks you to do, he'll empower you to do it. But I felt very inadequate. But when we work for God, we work for the greatest physician the world has ever known. And Psalm 32 verse 8 is a psalm that I held on to a lot. He said, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. He said, I will guide you with mine eye. How can we get better help than that? Well, the good news is the first health program was 1 guess. Whew, I could handle that. And the next program was, I think, 2 guests. And I think the next program we got 3 or 4, so little by little. But even when we had 3 or 4 guests on the first evening, so the guests would come in through the day, I'd do 1-to-1, and I would do a consultation, and I would just compare their life with the 8 laws of health. And often I would see where something maybe has gone wrong here or there. We would do 2 days on juices. We did the same program that was at Living Valley Springs. It worked so well. 2 days on juices, and then the rest of the days, breakfast and lunch. We had a little steam sauna that we used. Sometimes we'd do massage. So we had the program very, very simple. And if I wasn't sure what to do, I would just go to the books and I'd see the herbs for that. And we might put that person on a herb tea for that. And poultices, we'd just keep it. It was very, very simple. Do you know that's all it has to be? It's very, very simple. But in the evening, so the guests would come in, I could handle 1-to-1. And they'd have a lunch, and then in the afternoon they'd have their steam, and then in the evening there would be an induction lecture. But I was so shy that Michael would start talking, and I'd be next to him, and he'd talk a little bit about how our retreat started and about the children and their skills. And then he'd start asking me questions, and he'd get me talking, and when he got me talking, he'd leave. He says that's how little by little he got me into the work. It was probably within about 3 or 4 years we had a full house. By then we had more staff. We ended up having 3 massage therapists, a laundry lady, a cook, and a kitchen hand. We had a gardener. So we had a male massage therapist, so we had a lot more people, and little by little, God certainly blessed. And we would start on Sunday, 2 days juicing, Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Friday morning I would give a lecture on the mind, which was a lot simpler than what I have given today. And then the guests would go home Friday afternoon, and then we'd start another program on the Sunday. And we'd do 2 weeks like that, then we'd have a whole week off, and then we'd do that again. Michael said, Barbara, I need you to be qualified. I want you to get qualified, because he said we can't get practitioner-only brands. And so then I did a correspondence course, which was a nutrition course. And I just loved that course. I really thirsted for the knowledge, and I really liked the course because you did assignments. And so you'd gather all the information, and then you'd put it together, then you'd read it again, and you'd make some adjustments. So by the time you finished your assignment, you have learnt a lot. Summarising things is a great way to learn. So I certainly learnt a lot during the nutrition course. After 5 years, certain things happened which caused us to move to another area, which was Misty Mountain Health Retreat up in the hills. Now, I'll just give you a little geography lesson here. Here is the east coast of Australia. The west coast of Australia we almost see as another country. I've only been over there once in my life. It's almost quicker to go to Fiji than it is to go way over the other side of Australia. So here is Victoria, and here is New South Wales, and this is Queensland. So Sydney is here, and Brisbane is here, and we're exactly halfway. Now, just inside the coast of the east coast of Australia, there's the Great Dividing Range. You might have heard of the Great Dividing Range, because right in the middle of Australia, it's all desert. So you've certainly got the tropics here, because remember the equator's up here. It's cold down here. I've got 2 daughters that live in the little island of Tasmania, and sometimes it snows down there, so it's quite cold down there. Mount Kosciuszko is about there. You might have heard of Cooma, that's where the snowfields are, but there's really no snow anywhere else. And up here is Darwin. You may have heard of Darwin. Darwin's about there. And they don't have winter, they just have wet and dry because it's so hot up there. So where we live, we have hot summers and we have cold winters. So we have frost on the ground in the winter, so sometimes it's, this is centigrade, a few below zero. And we're an hour and a half from the coast just up into the Great Dividing Range. If you Google Misty Mountain Health, you can look at photos of our little retreat where we have 450 acres. But when we first moved up, we moved up to another property that's way, way up in the hills. This is 1,200 acres, mostly bush. No electricity up there, and it was 2 hours from the town. And about 10 years ago, an Aboriginal boarding school came up for sale, because we were at full capacity and we could not build any more. And so we moved over to this property, which is only an hour from town, and it's very exciting because it's got a bridge over the creek. Don't have to drive through the creek anymore. And it has electricity, which makes life a little bit easier, but we have put a lot of solar panels on, so if the electricity goes down, we've got lots of solar. And so that is a quick short little explanation of how I got into the health work and how it really expanded from there. But what really changed things for us was about, we've been at our new Misty Mountain 10 years now, this one here. We're over there for 5 years. We're down in Melbourne for 5 years, where we first started. And every 3 years we would film my lectures, because I'm ever reading, ever learning. And so my lectures might have a similar format, but they're always changing. So every 3 years we refilm my lectures. And it was about 6 years ago, a man that's got a ministry down in Melbourne called Beyond Patmos, you might have heard it. And he films Signs of the Times, he films preachers, he films health. So we contracted him to film my lectures. And when he'd finished, he said, "These are very interesting. Do you mind if I put a little section of it up on my website?" And Michael said, "Do what you want." And the man had tears in his eyes. Michael said, "What's the matter?" He said, "No one's ever given me permission." Michael and I see this information as not ours. This is God's information. And the more that it can go out, the better. That's why wherever I go, they say, "Can we live stream?" I said, "Just do what you want." as much as you want. This is a message that the people are thirsting for, and I think you'll agree with me that this message opens the blind eyes. It releases the prisoners out of the prison house. 10 months later, he was filming at an Adventist convention, which we went to, and he saw us. He came running up to us. He said, 1 million hits. He said, I've never seen that on my website. And that's when the lectures started to go worldwide. That's when they went up on YouTube. Before the lockdown, a third of our guests were coming from overseas because of the YouTube. So that really opened up Misty Mountain Health Retreat, and it was because of those YouTube videos. Now, one of my children said to me, Mum, he's getting money every time someone watches your stuff on his website. And I said, oh, doesn't bother me. Anyway, 3 years later, we had someone else film me, and we put those up on our website. A year later, I was being filmed down in, well, I was giving a series of lectures in Melbourne. This was about early 2019, I think. And Henry, the guy from Beyond Patmos, heard that I was going to be giving a series of meetings, very similar to what I've done here this week, and he asked if he could do the filming, which we agreed, they agreed. So after the last meeting on Sabbath, the last meeting was 11 o'clock, and a lot of people were outside shaking my hand, chatting, and he came up to me and he said, excuse me, I just want to tell you, if you're wondering what happens to the money that I get from the people that watch your lectures on my website, he said, there are 2 schools in Africa now because of that money. So I thought that was a very nice story too. Are there any questions as we pull this to a close?
I have one online. It's asking about prostate health and prostate cancer and all that type of stuff.
The prostate is part of the reproductive organs, and so it would do the person well to watch my lecture on hormones on YouTube, but also to get my book, because my book defines specific programs to help when someone's conquering cancer. And there are a couple of specifics for prostate. One is saw palmetto. That herb directly reduces the inflammation of the prostate gland. And zinc. Zinc is very important to keep the testosterone levels at a safe level.
You mentioned you're coming out with a new book. Can you tell us when that might be?
Yes, well that's something they can't stop me doing, is writing. So even though I'm going home, I can write. The book is basically finished. It's being edited at the moment, and it's a handbook on natural remedies. So that will be no bigger than my book, Self-Heal by Design. I find that people don't want to be exhausted with huge books. I just want a very simple book. And one of the reasons I wrote it is, if someone says to me like that, prostate cancer, my mind goes this, 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 this. And one day I thought, you know, it's not written down. So it's time for me to write it down. So what I've done with the new book, I've got a chapter on the head, and then I'll do everything to head. It might be sinus, it might be eyes, it might be hair. So it's like a handbook on natural remedies. We're hoping that it'll be printed early next year.
Sounds good.
I've got a friend that he had throat cancer, and they did a bunch of operations, but they also irradiated the whole area. So now they're trying to do something to help his jaw because it's falling apart. Can you recommend anything that they could give him to maybe start that healing? I know the radiation just destroys.
Radiation does destroy. It's most unfortunate. I think that if he could do hot and colds to that area to bring blood supply into the area, and also if he could somehow sleep with castor or compress on his jaw, it penetrates deep and cleanses. But it sounds like it's time for him to try and keep away from those doctors.
Yeah.
And I must say that the doctors do the best they know. I'm not critical of that. There are some very good doctors, but this is how they've been schooled, and they do the best they know.
Online question says, would the ketogenic diet be beneficial for someone who's been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, severe adrenal inefficiency, and a large breast tumor the size of a tangerine?
That's a mouthful.
It is.
It would be good if they watched the hormone lecture and began the hormone balancing cream. That helps with the adrenal glands, and it helps with the thyroid gland, and it helps with the breast tumor, and the castor oil compress would help with that. So that's a start. But the ketogenic diet would be beneficial.
Plant-based ketogenic.
The plant one.
Plant-based ketogenic. Okay.
So 2 questions. What do you do for bunions so that they don't have to get surgery for it, to remove it?
Okay, for a bunion, sometimes it's quite advanced and surgery can certainly help, but castor oil compress on that, and that must be every single night. And if the bunion's been there for a while, it could take quite a while, so you just never give up. But yeah, I guess that's what I would try, but you might be looking at least 6 months before you see a result.
And I was just wondering, why a crock pot versus a pressure cooker for beans?
Well, a crock pot goes overnight. If you want your beans done very quickly, you'd use a pressure cooker, and they can be done in about 20 minutes. But if you want a slow cook, then you do it in a slow cooker overnight. It just depends what you want. No, Instapot, my daughter's got an Instapot, and it is a pressure cooker and a slow cooker. It's new to me, Instapots, but I think they do both.
The pressure cooker, I grew up with a pressure cooker, and it was aluminum. We have another one which we don't use, but I think it's aluminum too. Is there any problem with that?
Yeah, there is a big problem. The aluminium is known to damage the brain cells, so we should always use stainless steel.
Yes, I wanted to know about if you have like sweaty feet or fungus on your feet or toes.
Fungus on the feet and toes. My book, Self-Heal Design, shows how to get the fungus out of the body, because when it's on the toes, it's an illustration that it is in the body. But there is a use for vinegar, and that is after you shower to pour vinegar over that area. That can certainly kill it. And another thing you can do is soak your feet in sodium bicarbonate and water. The rule of thumb for the measurement is 1 teaspoon of sodium bicarbonate to 1 cup of water. So you might do a couple of litres or a couple of quarts, so that'd be about 8 teaspoons of sodium bicarbonate. So that can also help.
Okay.
Online question says, can you recommend relief from candida?
Yes. There's a book out there called Self-Heal by Design, and that book shows how you can eliminate fungus or candida from the body.
Thank you, Barbara. I want to just say there's about 19 loaves left. I have them in the foyer out here. So anybody that hasn't had one yet, please feel free to grab them. And if there's still some left over, you guys are welcome to take them all.
Okay, there we are. The most magnificent bread in the world is for free out there.
I was wondering if you can recommend anything for people that are exposed to mold, that lived in a house with mold, and is there anything to like rid their body of mold?
What happens when a person's living with mold? They can get out of the house and there will be a little bit of improvement, but now they've got to get the mold out of their body, and that can take a little bit of time. One lady told me that she was able to detox and get it out of her body in a month. But then another lady, it took her 18 months. It all depends on how serious this is, how long it has been in there. And my book, Self-Heal by Design, it has the programs in there. There's stage 1 antifungal diet. Usually a person will go on that for a couple of months and then go over to the stage 2 antifungal diet. And in the stage 2 antifungal diet, it is not quite as strict. There's a little bit more leeway with the fruits, the low glycemic fruits, but it is very effective, and we've seen many people be able to eliminate yeast by doing that.
My husband and I are planning to move to the Philippines by next year because it has been my desire to do the children's home ministry. These children who are living in the street, no parents, sorry. And I am very sure that we can use this. My question is, how do I get in touch with you to start? Because I do not know what to start in with the process of the like the healing, or no, God heals, but with the natural remedies that.
Well, I think it's a good idea to have a little bit of a kit, and that kit will have cayenne pepper in it, the kit will have charcoal in it, might have some slippery elm with it. You start real simple, and that's what you've got to remember. You just start simple. And I met a man from Peru who had a ministry in Peru for childless children, and I said, how did it start? He said, my wife and I were there on holiday, and he said, I saw these 2 little girls on the street. And he said, and I can't do anything because I'm a man. So he went to them and said, if you come here tomorrow, I'll get some shoes for you. So they were there the next day, and he brought his wife with him, and he found a family in the church. And what he did was he rented a house, and he set this couple in the house to look after these 2 little girls. And then he and his wife came back to the US, they finalised their affairs, and then they went back to Peru, and they bought a house there. That's how they started. And I thought, wow, I'm so impressed with that. Just a couple. And they ended up adopting those first 2 little girls, and he showed me a picture of them, and they've just gone through college. Very nice, but it's a lovely illustration. You just start where you are, and you keep it very, very simple.
Amen. Another online question says, can you use castor oil pack for dull appendix pain that seems something, but is undiagnosed?
With appendix,
inflamed, I think it was inflamed.
With an inflamed appendix, you've got to get the ice on there real quick. You've got to get ice on there to get that inflammation down. You do not apply heat to that. And a couple of enemas to free the colon can also bring relief. So an ice pack and enemas can do much.
Amen. Can we say amen to Barbara? Do you want? This will be our last question.
What remedies can you recommend for dealing with psoriasis? Like possibly gluten-free diet, or just?
Yep. I've seen many people totally conquer psoriasis. And there can be a few causes of psoriasis. There can be a bit of a genetic cause. I know some people exposed to mildew, but you've got to stop the 5 allergens. So there's your peanuts and your hybridized wheat and the dairy. Anyone know what's next? Your oats and your refined sugar. And remember, once these are stopped, it can take at least a couple of months to see an effect. And if it's all itchy, you must ice it. Never ever scratch. My son-in-law, who battled it all his life, that's how he found relief from it. Stress made it worse. Living in a mouldy house made it worse. At one stage, when it got really bad, he went grain-free. He just lived on vegetables and legumes, and it settled right down. Then little by little he started introducing other grains. But oh dear, I wish we had simple needs in Australia. The bread is so light and tasty, isn't it? I've never tasted a gluten-free bread like that. And so that is one bread that is safe to eat.